Captain Sarah Martinez stood at attention as General's voice boomed across the military training facility. The morning sun cast long shadows over the rifle range, where dozens of soldiers had gathered for the annual marksmanship competition. Sarah's hands remained steady at her sides, but inside, her heart raced with a mixture of determination and frustration. "Ladies and," General announced, his chest puffed with authority, "today we determine who among you has what it takes to represent our division in the International Military Games." His eyes swept across the assembled troops before landing on Sarah with unmistakable disdain. "Some of you seem to think that military service is about equality rather than capability." Sarah had heard these comments before. Ever since she had transferred to Fort Bradley 6 months ago, General had made his opinions about women in combat roles crystal clear. He believed the battlefield was no place for female soldiers, regardless of their training or qualifications. Sarah had graduated top of her class from sniper school, but the general seemed determined to ignore her achievements. The competition would test various shooting skills, starting with standard rifle accuracy at 200 meters, then progressing to more challenging distances and conditions. Sarah had been preparing for months, spending countless hours at the range, studying wind patterns and perfecting her breathing techniques. Her instructor, Sergeant Williams, had told her she possessed natural talent that he had rarely seen in his 20-year career. "Martinez," the general called out, causing several soldiers to turn and look at her. "Step forward." Sarah moved with crisp precision, her boots clicking against the concrete as she approached the general's position. She could feel the weight of every gaze upon her, some supportive, others skeptical. The general's aide, Lieutenant Colonel, stood nearby with a clipboard, recording scores and times. "I understand you fancy yourself quite the marksman," General said, his tone dripping with condescension. "Tell me, Captain, what makes you think you can compete with soldiers who have been doing this since before you learned to walk?" "Sir, I believe my training record speaks for itself," Sarah replied, maintaining eye contact despite the general's intimidating presence. "I've consistently scored in the top percentile during qualification exercises." The general let out a harsh laugh that carried across the range. "Qualification exercises? Those are nothing compared to real-world scenarios. Combat isn't a controlled environment with perfect weather and stationary targets." He turned to address the other soldiers, raising his voice so everyone could hear. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. Overconfidence based on classroom performance rather than battlefield experience." Sarah's jaw tightened, but she remained silent. She had learned early in her military career that arguing with superior officers only made situations worse. Instead, she channeled her frustration into focus, using the general's skepticism as motivation rather than allowing it to break her confidence. The first round of competition began with standard rifle shooting at 200 meters. Soldiers took turns approaching the firing line, where they had to hit 10 targets within a time limit. The morning air was crisp, with minimal wind that would make shooting conditions relatively favorable for experienced marksmen. Sarah watched as her fellow competitors took their turns. Sergeant, a veteran with 12 years of service, scored 9 out of 10 hits. Corporal Jackson, known throughout the division for his shooting skills, managed 8 hits but completed his round faster than anyone else. The pressure mounted as each soldier demonstrated their abilities. When Sarah's name was called, she could hear whispers from the assembled troops. Some voiced encouragement, while others seemed to share the general's doubts about her capabilities. She approached the firing line with her M24 sniper rifle, a weapon she had trained with extensively and knew as well as her own reflection. "Remember, Martinez," General called out loudly enough for everyone to hear. "This isn't like shooting paper targets in a comfortable indoor range. Real military operations require precision under pressure." Sarah settled into her shooting position, adjusting her scope and checking her breathing rhythm. The targets appeared clearly through her sight, black silhouettes against the sandy backdrop of the range. She had visualized this moment countless times during her preparation, imagining not just hitting the targets, but doing so with the kind of accuracy that would silence her critics. The timer started and Sarah began her sequence. Her first shot rang out across the range, followed quickly by 9 more in rapid succession. Each pull of the trigger felt smooth and controlled, her body working in perfect harmony with the weapon. When the timer stopped, she had completed her round faster than most of the previous shooters. The range officer called out her score over the loudspeaker. Captain Martinez, 10 out of 10, completed in 47 seconds. A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd of soldiers, but General's expression remained unchanged. Adequate performance for the opening round, he announced dismissively. Let's see how you handle the real challenges. The second round increased the difficulty significantly. Targets were placed at 400 meters, and soldiers had to account for wind conditions that had picked up since the morning began. Additionally, they were required to change positions between shots, simulating movement during combat situations. Sarah excelled in this round as well, adapting quickly to the changing conditions and maintaining her accuracy despite the added complexity. Her training had prepared her for exactly these types of scenarios, and she found herself feeling more confident with each successful shot. However, General's criticism only intensified. Anyone can perform well when they have time to calculate every variable, he announced after Sarah completed her second round with another perfect score. Combat doesn't give you the luxury of mathematical precision. Lieutenant Colonel approached the general and whispered something in his ear. Sarah couldn't hear the conversation, but she noticed the general's expression grow more serious. Whatever information was being shared seemed to be related to the competition's final challenge. "Attention, all competitors," the general announced. "We're moving to the advanced range for the final round. This will separate the truly skilled marksmen from those who simply got lucky in the preliminary rounds." The advanced range was located on higher ground, offering a panoramic view of the surrounding landscape. Here, targets could be placed at extreme distances, testing the absolute limits of both equipment and human skill. Sarah had trained on this range before, but never during an official competition with so much at stake. As the group moved to the new location, Sarah overheard conversations among her fellow soldiers. Some expressed admiration for her performance so far, while others seemed to share the general's skepticism about whether she could maintain her accuracy under more challenging conditions. Sergeant Williams, her former instructor, approached her during the transition. "You're doing exactly what I knew you could do," he said quietly. "Don't let the general's attitude get inside your head. Focus on the fundamentals and trust your training." Sarah nodded, grateful for the encouragement. She had always respected Sergeant Williams, whose guidance had been instrumental in developing her shooting skills. His confidence in her abilities meant more than any criticism from General. The final round would test shooting at 1,000 meters, a distance that required not only exceptional marksmanship, but also deep understanding of ballistics, wind patterns, and environmental factors. At this range, even the smallest mistake in calculation or technique could result in missing the target entirely. General seemed particularly pleased to announce this final challenge. "At 1,000 meters, there's nowhere to hide inadequate skills," he declared. "This is where we separate the soldiers who belong on the battlefield from those who should stick to desk jobs." Sarah felt the weight of expectation and skepticism pressing down on her as she prepared for the most challenging shot of her military career. She knew that her performance in this final round would either validate her abilities or confirm the general's prejudices about women in combat roles. The sun had reached its peak intensity, creating heat waves that would affect visibility and bullet trajectory. Wind conditions had become more variable, requiring constant adjustment and recalculation. These were exactly the type of challenging conditions that General claimed would expose the difference between range performance and combat readiness. As Sarah prepared her equipment for the final round, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. Every hour of training, every criticism she had endured, and every obstacle she had overcome had prepared her for this test of her abilities and determination. The wind had picked up considerably by the time Sarah reached the 1,000-meter firing line. She could see the target through her scope, a small black square that looked impossibly distant against the rocky hillside. The other competitors had struggled with this distance, with only 3 out of 15 managing to hit the target at all. General's satisfaction was evident as he watched each soldier fail to meet his expectations. "Martinez," he called out, his voice carrying a tone of anticipation. "Your turn to show us what you're made of." Sarah settled into position, feeling the familiar weight of her rifle against her shoulder. She had fired at this distance before during training, but never with so many eyes watching and so much pressure riding on the outcome. The heat from the afternoon sun created visible distortion in the air, making precise aiming even more challenging. Through her scope, she began her calculations. Wind speed appeared to be approximately 15 miles per hour, coming from the southwest. The target sat at an elevation roughly 50 feet higher than her position, requiring adjustment for the upward angle. Temperature and humidity would also affect the bullet's trajectory over such a long distance. "Take your time, Captain," General said mockingly. "We have all day to watch you miss." Sarah blocked out his voice and focused on her breathing. In through the nose for 4 counts, hold for 4 counts, out through the mouth for 4 counts. This rhythm helped steady her and calm her mind. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger, applying just enough pressure to feel the mechanism without engaging it. The crosshairs in her scope danced slightly with each heartbeat. Sarah waited for the natural pause between beats, the moment when her body was most still. She squeezed the trigger smoothly, feeling the rifle recoil against her shoulder as the shot broke clean and true. The bullet traveled through the air for what seemed like an eternity. At 1,000 meters, there was enough time to actually see the projectile's path through the scope if conditions were right. Sarah held her breath as she waited for the range officer's confirmation. "Hit center ring," the voice crackled over the radio communication system. A murmur of surprise rippled through the assembled soldiers. General's confident expression faltered slightly, but he quickly regained his composure. "Lucky shot," he announced loudly. "Anyone can get fortunate once." Lieutenant Colonel approached the general again, carrying what appeared to be a special notification. After reading the document, the general's face took on an expression that Sarah couldn't quite interpret. It wasn't quite anger, but it wasn't pleasure either. "It seems we have a special request from Division Headquarters," General announced. "They want to test our top performers at extreme range to evaluate their potential for special operations assignments." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. Special operations meant the most elite units in the military, soldiers who were deployed on the most dangerous and critical missions. It also meant that her performance here could significantly impact her career trajectory. "The test will be conducted at 2,000 meters, the general continued. "This distance pushes the absolute limits of both equipment and human capability. It requires not just skill, but instinct and intuition that cannot be taught." 2,000 meters was nearly double the distance Sarah had just successfully engaged. She had never attempted a shot at such extreme range, and she knew that very few soldiers in the entire military had the capability to hit targets at that distance. The margin for error would be incredibly small, with dozens of variables affecting the bullet's path. The group moved to an even more elevated position that provided clear sight lines to the 2,000-meter range. From this vantage point, Sarah could see the target only as a tiny speck in the distance. Without magnification, it would have been virtually invisible to the naked eye. "At this distance," General explained, "environmental factors become exponentially more important. Wind patterns can change multiple times during the bullet's flight. Temperature variations along the path can deflect the projectile. Even the rotation of the Earth becomes a factor in trajectory calculations." Sarah listened carefully to the technical briefing while mentally preparing herself for the most challenging shot of her life. She understood that success at this range would require not just technical skill, but also an element of intuition that separated truly exceptional marksmen from merely good ones. The other competitors who had performed well at 1,000 meters took their turns first. Sargent, despite his experience and proven ability, missed the target entirely. His shot appeared to go high and to the right, suggesting miscalculation of wind drift and bullet drop. Corporal Jackson's shot was closer but still missed by several feet. One by one, each soldier attempted the seemingly impossible shot. The best result came from Staff Sergeant, no relation to the general, who managed to hit the target frame but missed the actual scoring area. Out of 8 competitors who attempted the 2,000-meter shot, none had successfully hit the target. "This is exactly what I expected," General said with satisfaction. "Extreme range shooting requires years of specialized training and natural ability that very few soldiers possess. It's not something you can learn from textbooks or practice ranges." As Sarah prepared for her attempt, she noticed that the wind patterns had become even more complex. She could see flags at various distances showing different wind directions, indicating that conditions were changing along the bullet's path. This would require her to make educated guesses about average conditions rather than precise calculations. Her rifle was equipped with the best optics available, but even with maximum magnification, the target appeared incredibly small. Sarah adjusted her scope settings and checked her equipment one final time. Everything had to be perfect for a shot like this. "Last chance to preserve your dignity, Martinez," General called out. "No shame in admitting that some challenges are beyond your capabilities." Sarah ignored the taunt and focused on her preparation. She had learned to use negative comments as motivation rather than distraction. If anything, the general's skepticism made her more determined to succeed. The calculation process for a 2,000-meter shot was incredibly complex. Sarah had to account for bullet drop of nearly 40 feet wind drift that could vary significantly along the flight path, temperature and humidity effects, and even the effect caused by the Earth's rotation. All of these factors had to be estimated and compensated for simultaneously. She settled into her shooting position and began the mental checklist that had become second nature during her training. Breathing rhythm established, body position optimized, rifle stability confirmed, scope settings. Through her sight picture, the distant target seemed to float in the heat waves rising from the valley below. The first shot at this range would be primarily for ranging and wind reading. Sarah understood that she might need multiple attempts to zero in on the correct hold and windage adjustments. She squeezed off her first round and watched through the scope for impact. "Miss approximately 2 feet low and 1 foot right," came the report from the spotters positioned downrange. Sarah made mental notes about the correction needed and prepared for her second attempt. The wind appeared to be stronger than she had initially calculated, and the bullet drop was more significant than expected. She adjusted her point of aim accordingly. Her second shot was closer, missing by less than a foot according to the spotter's report. She was beginning to understand the unique conditions at this extreme range and felt more confident about her ability to make the necessary adjustments. "2 misses," General announced to the assembled group, as expected for someone without specialized training in extreme range shooting. Sarah had one more opportunity to attempt the shot. Military protocol typically allowed 3 attempts at challenging shooting exercises, recognizing that environmental factors and equipment could affect even the most skilled marksmen. For her third attempt, Sarah took extra time to study the wind flags and heat distortion patterns. She noticed that the wind seemed to follow a slight pattern, shifting direction approximately every 30 seconds. If she could time her shot to coincide with favorable conditions, she might be able to minimize wind drift. She also realized that her previous shots had been impacting consistently in the same relative position, suggesting that her calculations were close, but needed fine-tuning rather than major adjustments. This gave her confidence that the target was within her capabilities. The third shot felt different from the moment she squeezed the trigger. The rifle's recoil seemed smoother, and she maintained better sight picture through the scope. The bullet's trajectory appeared perfect as it arced through the afternoon air toward the distant target. The wait for confirmation seemed eternal. At 2,000 meters, it took several seconds for the bullet to reach its destination, followed by additional time for the spotter to confirm impact and communicate back to the firing line. "Hit outer ring," crackled the radio report. The assembled soldiers erupted in surprised cheers and applause. Even some of the officers who had seemed skeptical appeared impressed by Sarah's achievement. She had accomplished something that none of the other competitors had managed, hitting a target at a distance that challenged the limits of both equipment and human skill. General's face showed a mixture of surprise and something that might have been grudging respect. However, his voice remained stern when he addressed Sarah. "Congratulations on a successful shot, Captain. However, one hit at extreme range doesn't necessarily indicate consistent capability." Lieutenant Colonel approached the general with another document, this one appearing more urgent than the previous communications. After reading it quickly, the general's expression became serious in a different way, as if he had just received unexpected and important information. Lieutenant Colonel whispered urgently in General's ear as he handed over a folder marked with official military seals. Sarah watched from the firing line as the general's expression changed dramatically while reading the contents. His face shifted from skepticism to surprise, then to something that looked almost like disbelief. "Captain Martinez," the general called out, his voice lacking its usual dismissive tone. "Report to my position immediately." Sarah secured her rifle and approached the command area where several senior officers had gathered. The other competitors watched with curiosity as she walked past them, wondering what could have prompted such an urgent summoning. The general's aide stood nearby with additional documents, suggesting that whatever information had been received was substantial and official. "Captain, I've just received your complete military record from Personnel Command," General began, holding the folder in his hands. "It seems there are details about your background that weren't included in your transfer documentation." Sarah maintained her professional demeanor while internally wondering what information could have prompted such a dramatic change in the general's attitude. Her transfer papers had included all of her training records and performance evaluations, so she couldn't imagine what additional details might have emerged. "According to this report," the general continued, "you were selected for and completed the military's most advanced sniper training program at Fort Benning. Is this accurate?" "Yes, sir," Sarah replied. "I graduated from the Special Operations Target Interdiction course 18 months ago." The general's eyes widened slightly. The Special Operations Target Interdiction course was the military's most elite sniper training program, with a graduation rate of less than 20%. Only soldiers who demonstrated exceptional aptitude and mental toughness were even considered for admission to the program. "The report also indicates that you hold the current training record for longest confirmed training shot," General continued, his voice becoming more respectful. "At 4,000 meters. A murmur of amazement rippled through the assembled soldiers who overheard this revelation. 4,000 meters was an almost unimaginable distance for accurate shooting, requiring not just exceptional skill, but also perfect conditions and specialized equipment. Very few soldiers in military history had successfully engaged targets at such extreme range. Sarah nodded confirmation. "Yes, sir. The shot was made during advanced training exercises in Montana using specialized .50 caliber equipment under optimal weather conditions." The general looked down at the document again, as if confirming what he had just read. "The report states that you achieved this record while being observed by military representatives from 3 different countries who were evaluating our sniper training capabilities." "That is correct, sir," Sarah replied. "The shot was documented and by multiple independent observers as part of an international military cooperation exercise." General's entire demeanor had changed. Gone was the condescending attitude and dismissive comments that had characterized his interaction with Sarah throughout the competition. Instead, he seemed to be processing the realization that he had been ridiculing one of the most skilled marksmen in the entire military. "Captain, why wasn't this information included in your transfer documentation?" he asked. "Sir, I assumed my complete record would be available through normal channels," Sarah replied diplomatically. "The Special Operations Command sometimes maintains separate documentation for security reasons related to classified training methods." The truth was more complicated. Sarah's exceptional abilities had made her a target for recruitment by various elite units, and she had specifically requested a standard transfer to Fort Bradley to gain experience with conventional forces before deciding on her career path. She hadn't expected to encounter such pronounced skepticism about women in combat roles. Lieutenant Colonel approached with additional information. "General, the report also indicates that Captain Martinez turned down offers from Delta Force and SEAL Team 6 to accept her current assignment. She specifically requested placement with a conventional unit to broaden her military experience." This revelation created another wave of surprised murmurs among the assembled soldiers. Delta Force and SEAL Team 6 represented the absolute pinnacle of military special operations. The fact that Sarah had not only been recruited by these units, but had actually turned down their offers suggested a level of skill and recognition that few soldiers ever achieved. General closed the folder and looked directly at Sarah with what appeared to be genuine respect for the first time since their initial meeting. "Captain, I owe you an apology. My comments throughout today's competition were inappropriate and based on incomplete information about your qualifications and achievements." Sarah appreciated the apology but remained focused on maintaining professional protocol. "Thank you, sir. I understand that personnel information doesn't always transfer completely between different command structures." The general turned to address the assembled soldiers. "Ladies and What we've witnessed today is a demonstration of excellence that should serve as inspiration for all of us. Captain Martinez has not only excelled in today's competition, but has achieved recognition at the highest levels of military marksmanship. The other competitors approached Sarah with congratulations and expressions of amazement. Sergeant shook her hand and said, "I had no idea we were competing against someone with your level of training. That 2,000-meter shot makes a lot more sense now." Corporal Jackson laughed good-naturedly. "Here I was thinking I might have a chance to win this competition. If I had known about the 4,000-meter record, I would have just asked for shooting tips instead." Sergeant Williams, Sarah's former instructor, approached with a proud smile. "I knew you had exceptional talent from the beginning, but I had no idea about the advanced training and records. You've represented our training program better than I could have hoped." General requested a private conversation with Sarah away from the other soldiers. As they walked to a quieter area of the range, he seemed to be choosing his words carefully. "Captain, I need to address the elephant in the room," he began. "My attitude toward women in combat roles has been influenced by outdated thinking and personal biases that have no place in today's military. Your performance today, combined with learning about your actual qualifications, has forced me to confront some uncomfortable truths about my own prejudices." Sarah appreciated the general's honesty and willingness to acknowledge his mistakes. "Sir, I understand that change can be difficult, especially for those who have served for many years under different expectations and standards." "That's no excuse," General replied firmly. "Excellence is excellence, regardless of gender. I've been so focused on my preconceptions that I nearly missed recognizing truly exceptional ability right in front of me." The conversation continued as they discussed Sarah's career goals and the general's plans for upcoming military exercises. He offered to write recommendation letters for any special operations applications she might consider in the future, acknowledging that his unit would benefit greatly from her expertise. As the day's competition officially concluded, Sarah reflected on the unexpected turn of events. She had expected to face skepticism and had prepared herself mentally for the challenge of proving her capabilities. However, she hadn't anticipated that her performance would lead to such a dramatic reversal in the general's attitude. The other soldiers continued to approach her with questions about her training and experiences. Many expressed genuine interest in learning from her techniques and knowledge. The atmosphere had shifted from skepticism and competition to respect and curiosity about her background. Staff Sergeant, who had achieved the best performance at 2,000 meters before Sarah's successful shot, asked about training opportunities. "Captain, do you think someone with my current skill level could qualify for advanced sniper training?" Sarah encouraged his interest while being realistic about the challenges involved. "The selection process is extremely rigorous, both physically and mentally. But based on your shooting today, you definitely have the fundamental skills that could be developed further with the right training." As the afternoon concluded, General made an announcement to the assembled troops. "Today's competition has reminded me that the military's greatest strength comes from recognizing and developing talent wherever we find it. Captain Martinez will be appointed as our new marksmanship training coordinator, with responsibility for developing advanced shooting programs for interested personnel." This appointment represented exactly the kind of opportunity Sarah had hoped to find when she requested assignment to a conventional unit. The position would allow her to share her knowledge and experience while helping other soldiers develop their capabilities. It also demonstrated that her abilities were now being recognized and valued rather than dismissed. The drive back to the main base gave Sarah time to process everything that had happened. She had started the day facing skepticism and condescension from a commanding officer who doubted her abilities based on gender rather than performance. By the end of the day, that same officer was apologizing for his prejudice and offering her a leadership position. More importantly, the day had demonstrated that excellence could overcome bias when given the opportunity to be displayed fairly. Sarah's shooting performance had spoken louder than any argument or protest could have. The 4,000-meter record that had initially been overlooked became the key to changing minds and opening new possibilities. As she parked her vehicle at the base housing area, Sarah smiled at the irony of the situation. General had spent months ridiculing her abilities and questioning her place in the military. Yet when confronted with documented evidence of her exceptional skills, He had not only changed his opinion, but had become one of her strongest supporters. The next morning brought new opportunities and responsibilities as Sarah began her role as marksmanship training coordinator. Her office came with access to training records for the entire division, allowing her to identify soldiers with potential for advanced development. She also received budget authority for upgrading range facilities and purchasing specialized training equipment. Her first priority was developing a comprehensive training program that would help soldiers of all skill levels improve their marksmanship abilities. Drawing from her experience with advanced training methods, she designed courses that emphasized not just technical shooting skills, but also mental preparation and stress management techniques. Within weeks, Sarah's programs were showing measurable results. Soldiers who had previously struggled with basic marksmanship requirements were passing their qualifications with improved scores. More advanced shooters were developing skills that prepared them for specialized roles and assignments. General became one of Sarah's strongest advocates, frequently citing her programs as examples of innovation and excellence within the division. His transformation from skeptic to supporter became a powerful example of how leadership could evolve and improve when confronted with evidence that challenged existing assumptions. The story of Sarah's impossible 4,000-meter shot spread throughout the military community, serving as inspiration for other soldiers who faced doubt or skepticism about their abilities. Her success demonstrated that exceptional performance could overcome bias and create opportunities for advancement and recognition. Years later, many of the soldiers who witnessed Sarah's performance that day would remember it as a turning point in their understanding of what was possible when talent was recognized and developed regardless of preconceptions. The general who had once ridiculed her became a champion for equal opportunity and merit-based advancement throughout his remaining years of service.